All right, well, good morning. Good morning. My name is James Hatfield, pastor here at the Asheville Church, my wife Danielle and I. And we've been in a series, and I haven't been in most of it because I've been with the wonderful kids. And one of the little girls that was in the class is always like, "Are you going to come back today and be my teacher?" I'm like, "Not today. I'm preaching today." She goes, "You better come back." She has so much attitude. It's so great. This is not on the notes, but I was telling Chad about this morning, but we were learning about Jesus falling asleep on the boat during the storm, and he gets up and he calms the storm, and I'm talking to all the kids, and I'm like, "Hey, when the storm's lightning outside, what do you do?" And little boy will stand up and, "Well, I sing and pray," and I'm like, "That's so great." Other kids are like, "I get under the covers, and I'm scared." And this little girl, I just love her. She's like, "I get up out of my bed, I go to that window, and I say, 'Not today.'" It's like, okay. I just love being with those children, and if you haven't had a chance to go and be with them, you should, because you'll get to experience wonderful things like that. So that, again, was not on my notes, but we've been in this series called, around disciple and tough, challenging teachings from Jesus. And I hope that some of you have felt challenged from them. I hope that some of you have felt more compelled to get closer to Christ through them. And that also some of your thinking may have been challenged here as well about what Jesus is trying to say. So I'd like everyone to go ahead and grab their Bible. We have a saying here at the Asheville Church. We want everyone to lay their own eyes on the Bible for themselves, whether you're turning it on your phone or grabbing the analog version. So today, we are going to be talking about being generous to the poor. And I love preaching when I know I'm preaching at me. It's easier to preach, right? You're like, "Dang, I know I need to hear this." And I think the church needs to hear this as well. So we're going to be talking today about being generous to the poor. And we're going to start turning our Bible to Luke chapter 11, and this will be the only teaching that we need all day. And I'm also, later on, going to have some brothers and sisters come up to share. So it's going to be a little bit different today. So, Luke chapter 11, we'll start in verse 37. When Jesus had finished speaking, a Pharisee invited him to eat. So he went in and reclined at the table. But the Pharisee was surprised when he noticed that Jesus did not first wash before the meal. Then the Lord said to him, "Now then, you Pharisees clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside you are full of greed and wickedness. You foolish people! Did not the one who had made the outside make the inside also? But now, as for what is inside you, be generous to the poor, and everything will be clean for you." Let's look at verse 38. We're going to go verse by verse and start to break this down a little bit. First, look, this Pharisee is a religious person. They're very surprised that Jesus didn't wash before the meal. They had a tradition to wash before they sat down. Jesus didn't do it, just sat on down, and I love how he reclined at the table. That's his typical position, ain't it, at the table? I need to imitate that a little bit more. But he was surprised, this Pharisee. Why didn't he wash? It would be like, why does this guy up here preaching right now have a hat on when he's preaching? I wore my prop today just for that line. I don't know if anybody was thinking that, but if you were, I'm trying to make it modern. Why is he preaching in that hat? See, us religious people, we like to get judgy real quick, don't we? We forget to put our stone down. If you remember when all the folks were putting their stone down, not to stone the woman. The old people did first, and then the younger people. But sometimes we keep that stone. We're ready. We're like, I don't know why he ain't washing his hands before dinner, said the Pharisee. But we would never do that. That's not us. Let's look at verse 39. Then the Lord said, "Now then, you Pharisees clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside you are full of greed and wickedness." Woo! Thanks for coming to dinner or lunch, Jesus. Wow. This Pharisee was more concerned about traditions and the washing of the hands than being moral, and in this case, greed and wickedness. Like, we would never do that, though, right? Like, on Sunday, we'd come on Sunday, we'd come every Sunday, but there's nothing we struggle with during the week, right? No morality. We just want to be part of our traditions, right? No, we do. We struggle with this. I do. Struggle with my traditions, and then during the week, I've got my sin that I'm dealing with. In this case, greed and wickedness. Have you ever been more concerned about your traditions than your morals? Like, oh, I never miss a Sunday service, but meanwhile, you're addicted to some sin during the week that nobody knows about. I love how relevant the Bible is for us today and how we can be called out directly here on our own hypocrisy in a few short scriptures that we've read. In verse 40, you foolish people, did not the one who made the outside make the inside also? Have you ever thought about the tone that Jesus might be using here? Do you think he was just, oh, you foolish people, or are you foolish people? I don't know. There's an exclamation point in my Bible here. But that was very confrontational to do something like this, to say this and get right to it. Because he's lumping this Pharisee in with this group of people. You foolish people. Wow. Did not the one who made the outside make the inside also? See, the inside of the person sometimes will manifest itself on out. Now, sometimes it just stays in there because we are so good at keeping secrets. But sometimes we're not that good at keeping secrets. And the things that are going on inside find a way to manifest themselves out. God knows what's going inside you right now. God knows. Maybe nobody else that you are close to knows. But God knows. God knows what's going on inside you. So you can fool people, but eventually what's going on inside is going to come out. And this is what Jesus is saying here, by the way. Are you harboring something that needs to come out right now? Are you acting out in sin during the week and nobody knows about it? What is really going inside you? Eventually what's going on is going to come out. And let's look at verse 41. But now, as for what is inside you, be generous to the poor, and everything will be clean for you. Wow, Jesus, what? Like, he literally could have said any kind of advice there. Now, greed's one of the things he's pointing out, for sure, and wickedness. Like, he could have had his A, B, C, 10-step plan, study series, book, right? You know, as we confess, or we hear confessing, sometimes we get to it. Jesus is like, hey, be generous to the poor, and then everything will be clean. Wow. See, we know this Pharisee right here. He said, as for you, you struggle with greed and wickedness. He made it real personal at the end there. Is this what you would have expected Jesus to say? I didn't when I read it. Geez. You know, maybe someone you know is not being moral right now and confessing that to you. Or maybe you're confessing your greed or wickedness. Maybe we just are like, hey, be generous to the poor, and the rest will be clean with you. How are you doing? How am I doing? How are you doing, James, with being generous to the poor? Oh, but Jesus, I'm a college student. I have no money. So they're exempt, right? They're exempt from being generous to the poor to help them become clean. But Jesus, I'm busy. I have 4 kids and a full-time job. I have no time for the poor. By the way, that's my situation, right? That's my excuse. But Jesus, I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do. Where do I start? So I'm going to have Sam Vang, my wife Daniela, and I'm going to have Alex Garcia come up, and we're going to have a little panel-style discussion. Might have two over here and one over here, or vice versa. You guys find a mic. Just don't stand directly behind me. I'm going to keep going for a second before I ask you guys some questions. But did you know that if you're in a microchurch here in Asheville, that each microchurch has partnered with some local nonprofits? Now, some are a little bit further along than others, other different microchurches. So that's going on right now. We're partnering. Do you know what your microchurch nonprofit is? I don't know. Have you ever served with your time? Oh, but Jesus, I'm too busy on Saturday. I can't serve. Got to cut the grass. Have you donated any money to the nonprofit that your microchurch is serving? Oh, but Jesus, my church pastor didn't ask me. They didn't ask me to give any money. Okay. Brothers and sisters, what I'm trying to say is if you need help, we have people to help you. If you don't know where to start, just ask. Just ask, hey, I need help. I don't know how to do this. We get it. Totally get it. Totally get it. Here's the thing, brothers and sisters, many of you are fully capable of being generous to the poor in your own way that makes sense for you. We're all different. We have all different situations with time and money and obligations, and Saturdays can be filled with our jobs for some folks. Like, well, I get it. It's I totally understand. But you're capable of finding your own way. It doesn't necessarily have to be microchurch to be generous to the poor. And it doesn't always have to be with money if you don't have much, or time if you maybe we need to cut out some areas to make that happen. Jesus here, he's simply just saying to clean the inside, we need to go be generous to the poor. That's all he said. There's no ABC step plan. He didn't tell the Pharisee how to do it. So if you're feeling a little convicted right now, or a little angry maybe, or frustrated, or I don't know who's talking to me. If you're angry, that's okay. That's okay. We're just reading a hard teaching from the Bible, from Jesus. Jesus was not that popular. And in fact, you may not become very popular if you want to follow him. You may not be popular at work. You may not be popular at your community. Just say the name Jesus. Nothing else. See how that goes. He can divide pretty well. And these are hard. So here's the thing. Jesus loves you. Jesus loves me. We struggle like this Pharisee did. I am no better. You are no better. We are no better than as we struggle. Don't we? So, I have these wonderful, beautiful people, especially you. You're super pretty. That's my wife, by the way, so I can say that. And they're going to come up and talk a little bit about what God's doing in their lives. Okay, just so we can hear some other experiences. And I wanted to mix it up a little bit so you don't have to listen to me the entire time. But they have some really great stories, I think, to share about what God is up to. So I'm going to ask them a question, and then panel style will go right down, and we'll give each person a chance to respond. So we'll start off pretty easily here. What nonprofit has your microchurch or your family, in some cases family, partnered with? And how long have you been partnered with them? So Sam, why don't you start?
Is this one on?
It is now, yep.
Is on now? Yep. Cool. So I'm kind of speaking on behalf of Kate, who kind of spearheads most of our service projects with our microchurch. But the two that we've worked with most closely have been the Veterans Quarters by ABCCM, and they serve, obviously, the veteran community. And then we also have done volunteer work with the Hillcrest Community Center, which is Section 8 housing for low-income people. And so, those are the organizations that we...
Yeah, and that's with your family as well, you and Maui and
no,
kids?
Well,
you guys have...
Yeah, we do, like, our own thing sometimes. Maui has really great connections with... United Way, sorry, it slipped my mind. And so we do a lot of volunteering. In fact, I think they're doing something this week for that. Yeah, aside from that, those are our two
That's great.
organizations that our mega church works with.
Thank you. Danielle, what about for you?
So our family, a few years back, we started singing regularly at nursing homes or at hospice, and we would bring other people along to sing to the folks there. And then that got shut down with COVID. So since then, we volunteered for a while at Manna Food Bank. And then most recently, the last couple years, we bring a meal every month to the residents and staff at a place called Transformation Village, which is also run by ABCCM.
Thank you. And what about for you?
The North Micro Church, we're partnered with Elida Home. That's a children's home place right off of New Leicester Highway and in West Asheville. And we've been working with them since about August last year.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the year, we started off the partnership and COVID happened, and then we kind of delayed, not until August do we begin. But generally once a month, we're working out there serving on their campus.
That's awesome. Thank you. And by the way, we're not bringing up everyone here to get any like trumpet sounding. We just have never really shared this with the church. So figured we'd let everybody know. But we'd rather serve very quietly and not let the left hand know what the right hand's doing. We don't need thank yous from these organizations or people that we're trying to serve our time and money with. I'm simply just wanting, and we prefaced this, I talked to this group a little bit to get our questions together to make sure that it wasn't too trumpetous. We don't want to be on the corner in that way. But the next question that I had was, who does this nonprofit serve? And if you could give a little bit of detail, what type of individuals are these different nonprofits targeting?
Right, so for the veterans quarters, they serve veterans. And typically these are veterans who are struggling with mental health or other just substance abuse and whatnot. So there's a lot of other factors involved. Veterans with no access to housing, etc. So that's typically what we've done is go to their cafeteria, dining area, and help serve food. And they actually get a lot of volunteers from different churches all around the area. But that's one of them. The other one is Hillcrest Community Center, and they're Section 8. You want me to take off my mask? Maui's like, you can't hear me.
Yeah.
So Hillcrest Community Center is a, again, like I said, Section 8 housing. And we go there to, help their food pantry, organize the food pantry, and then they pass out the food to community members around the area. So that's kind of the current two projects that we've done.
Do you mind if you and I get get vulnerable for a second?
Sure.
I think you'd be okay. I've known you for 2 decades, so if not, you're like, But just to let everyone know, nobody up here is above anybody. We're not. We're not better than because we're able to serve in the moment of our life. Situations change, and I was thinking about you, Sam, a little bit about your personal situation growing up, and how sometimes these nonprofits have even benefited you personally. Would you mind being willing to share?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think you kind of prefaced us with some of those questions, but I grew up in Section 8 housing in trailer parks. My parents came here with nothing but the clothes on their backs, and we grew up in these areas. I found it very revealing, kind of interesting, because as a child, when you're going through these experiences, you don't really connect the dots that, hey, we're poor and we're of low income status, and you don't really connect the dots. You just kind of live your life, play in the mud, yada yada yada. But as I go back into these communities to serve, it's humbling, and it's revealing of where my heart is. And I could really go into. I actually brought a book. I wanted to read something from it.
Great, we'll get to that too.
Yeah, but it's definitely it's humbling. It's revealing of our hearts, especially those of us in this room. Most of us, we're kind of lower to middle to upper middle class Americans, and we live in a certain paradigm. And that's all I have to say.
No, thank you. I'm going to draw out little strings because I know you guys. So Daniela, what nonprofits? The original question was, are we serving currently? Are you serving? And some detail about them.
Sure.
Yeah.
Transformation Village is transitional housing for it's all women, women veterans and women with children who would otherwise be homeless. And so it gives them a stable place to be so you can have an address and some stability in your life, and provides things like addiction recovery or job training just to really let them get their feet under them and a fresh start in life. So most women on average stay about a year there before they're able to transition out to their own.
Thank you. And I'm going to draw on just like I did with Sam, with you. And by the way, you were prepped for this stuff, but I figured we'd try to make it authentic and off the cuff. Your father, graduated from NC State, architect, had the 3 kids in the house and all of that, and got impacted when he went to a Habitat for Humanity, and ended up leaving his architecture practice. And where did you guys move, and what did you see? And you were a little girl at that time, just like Sam was talking about when he was a kid. What was it like for you to move and live in Indonesia and build homes and be around that a little bit? Can you talk just for a second about that and your own impact as a kid?
Yeah, we went to the Philippines for 3 years and then Indonesia for 8. And kind of like Sam, I was a kid, so I thought like a child. And we lived everywhere, sometimes we were in the slums in big cities, sometimes we were out in little villages that didn't even have roads into them, no electricity, no running water, all that. We moved a lot, and we were in lots of different contexts, but I think because I was a child, I wasn't like thinking deeply about what we were doing, but it definitely now gives me a bigger perspective on the world. I hear myself complaining, I don't know, the car is cold, it's not heating up fast enough. I think that's what I was complaining about this morning, so. And then you're like, why am I complaining about this? So it definitely, when I remember the things that I've seen and lived in, It changes my perspective.
I know even for Thanksgiving, so your parents have come back, and there was a girl there who they were had impact with, and she ended up finding a way with no money to come to the States. And she was at our Thanksgiving with her 2 kids. And every time I'm around her, I'm reminded of the impact that not just serving and giving can have, but on our families. Like, we make new family, from half a world away, and we're celebrating Thanksgiving there. And you've told me a little bit about her previous situation. I was like, wow, God does amazing things. Anyway, thanks for sharing that. And we're still on the question of some detail about who the prophet is serving. Yeah.
Sure. Elida serves children and young adults. They do it in a couple different ways. What their organization began as, children would come and live on the campus. Right now, I think there's a few dozen who live on the campus, and they are likely receiving psychiatric care for trauma. They're, in addition to the ones who live on campus, Elida also supervises foster care programs where families are taking in these children, helping them transition through adoption. And Elida also does schooling and after-school programs as well. Some children that either those in the foster care or those who maybe have had difficulty in public school, they come to Elida Home and they receive schooling there. And then there are, I mentioned young adults, so the children who have been in their care, who have grown up, Elida provides work training and stuff to help equip the young adults with skills to be able to provide for themselves after they've transitioned out of these kind of situations.
Yeah, thanks for that. So we're going to switch gears just for a second, and now we're going to make it personal. We want to give a little overview of what some of the things that were going on, but now let's turn our attention to what is God What's God showing you through these experiences, Sam?
Sort of kind of answered that a little bit, right? Like how God has revealed in my heart that there's a state of brokenness that mutual. There's a state of brokenness that affects all of us. I know in our Western middle class paradigm, we think of poverty in a material sense, but as Christians, as disciples, there's a greater collective disparity we all have for God. I want to read from this book. This is actually a great book. It's called When Helping Hurts by Stephen Corbett and Brian Fickert. But it's a great book that my wife turned me on to. But it has a little section in here that talks about that dynamic. I just want to read it real quick if that's okay.
Yeah.
It says, one of the major premises of this book is that until we embrace our mutual brokenness, our work with the poor and low income is likely to do far more harm than good. Research from around the world has found that shame is a major part of the brokenness of low income people and their experience and their relationships to that experience. And I felt that, growing up, seeing my mom walk up to the grocery store with food stamps. Even as a little kid, you didn't quite understand what's going on, but my mom went about things differently. She didn't use, a card or cash. She used a special booklet to get food for us. And then, so he goes on to say, instead of seeing themselves as being created in the image of God, low-income people often feel they are inferior to others. And this can paralyze the poor from taking initiative and from seizing opportunities, therefore locking them into material poverty. But at the same time, the economically rich, including most of the readers of this book, we also suffer. We suffer from what he calls the God complex, a subtle and unconscious sense of superiority in which they believe they have achieved their wealth through their efforts, and they have been anointed to kind of decide what is best for lower income people. And then they view those people as inferior to themselves. So, and a few of us are conscious of having a God complex, which is part of the problem. We're often deceived by Satan, by our sinful natures. And he goes on, and I want to end with this. One of the biggest problems in many poverty alleviation efforts is that their design and implementation exasperates the God complexes and the feelings of inferiority and shame. The way that we act toward the economically poor often communicates, albeit unintentionally, that we are superior and they are inferior. And in the process, we hurt the poor and ourselves. So that's some of the things that that have kind of come to my purview as I go into these Section 8 housing communities, and I look back at my own life and I realize, oh wow, so that's how it feels. That's how it feels to be under the umbrella of shame. And now I'm coming from the opposite end, where I've had the privileges of education and now wealth and being a middle class American, and then having this unintentional and subconscious, or however you want to put it, perspective on the poor. And that's something that I've had to wrestle with. And that's one of the things that God's taught me and has brought to my attention through our service projects.
Thank you.
Yeah. I was looking back, and I realized that early in our marriage that serving the poor was just not a thing for us. And I mean, we would go, like, if someone or like the church or something organized, like, oh, we're doing this service event, we'd show up to it usually. But if nobody had organized it for us, we didn't have a conviction that, like, we need to go look for it. Like, we're going to find a way to serve. Like, we just wouldn't have at all. And I remember a conversation with my dad. It was right after I had my first child, and I was like totally rocked by like motherhood, and it was a shock to the system. But I was trying to get my ducks in a row, and I was like, okay, Dad, here's my plan for my life, and I'm going to focus on this and do that. And after he listened to me for a while, he just said, okay, are you planning to do anything for anybody else? And I was so convicted by his question, because I realized that everything in my plans and my whole focus was on myself and my family. And so it really stuck with me. And I've really grown in my own conviction that serving is not like a nice extracurricular that we do if we get around to it, but that it's actually an essential part of following Jesus. And in every season of our lives, that there's no like magical season when things will be less busy, or like my life will be in order and then I'll be able to serve. Like, it's not going to happen. So if we don't proactively put it in our lives and our schedules and our budgets, it'll just get squeezed out every time. So those are a lot of the convictions that I think we've come to.
Thanks for sharing. And Alex, what has God shown you through these experiences?
God has shown me that, there are needs like all around us. Sometimes we can be sheltered to what's going on, even like within our own church body. We're not seeing some of the struggles that are going on out there in the world. And when we step foot onto the campus, it's like, man, there are children who are living here. There are children who are completely reliant on the services that are being provided here. And it's this very humbling kind of moment. Humbling in a way that it's like, oh, wow, like God has worked in blessings in our lives, but also there's not some kind of magical fix for a bunch of the problems that are happening around us. And sometimes you can have maybe like a superhero complex, and it's like, oh man, I could try to solve everything, and you get there and you're like, oh no, I can't like fix this kind of stuff. I can try to serve in these little bits. And yeah, it's just the humbling kind of moment there.
This is our last question, and thank you guys for doing this, by the way. How do you feel that these engagements have affected or will affect the church, your family, neighbors, and coworkers? And then anything else you might want to add? And that'll be the last question.
As far as our micro church, I think it's just scratching the surface of really getting our hearts to where they need to be in terms of serving the poor. Because I think we compartmentalize and we divorce. I think you read in Luke there where Jesus tells this Pharisee, like, if you give to the poor, then you'll also be clean. So there's a connection between our giving and our sacrifice with cleanliness. And I think Jesus is talking about all cleanliness, spiritual cleanliness, like the cleanliness of the purity of your heart. Like, that's all connected with our giving. And so I think as our microchurch starts to delve into these communities, and we're still trying to hone in on trying not to make it just transactional, like, hey, we showed up, we did our thing, we leave, but turning that into more of a relational interaction, so that it's not just, we give you this, and you give us a pat on the back, and we feel good about ourselves, right? So that's the dynamic that we're trying to fight against. It's God complex, which is the shame that the communities feel. So anyways, I think, I'm hoping the effect that we have on the microchurch is that we are able to mature and grow in that area. The effect that it's had on my family and that we've been trying to really push even in our kids is we make them engage. We bring them to these things, these events, these service projects, and we try to make sure they're, involved. And we have discussions. We have discussions about why this needs to happen and why we need to make it happen. So, so those are my thoughts. And ultimately, it's just a wrestling with my own character and, this own our own blind spots as, middle-class Americans, so that we can serve and give and not to expect anything from it, but to really be like Jesus, and ultimately, like Jesus says, be cleansed.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think something along the same lines as what Sam was sharing stood out to me there in verse 41. It just surprises me what Jesus says. Now, as for what is inside you, be generous to the poor. And I think that's what God's been doing in my own heart recently, is like we've started serving consistently, but it has often felt like this, not what is inside me, it's felt like this thing we do, like an external. And God has been showing me my own ungenerous attitudes in that sometimes. Like I can go do the thing, like service project, but then it might be with a hard heart or a stingy heart or a heart that's looking down on the people we're serving. And I looked a little earlier in that chapter of Luke 11, verse 34 and 35. Jesus is talking about how we see things. He says, your eye is the lamp of your body. When your eyes are healthy, your whole body also is full of light. But when they are unhealthy, your body also is full of darkness. See to it then that the light within you is not darkness. And I've thought a lot about that recently, and what our King values, right? We're in his kingdom, and what he values is so different, and he calls us to honor people and situations that the world, and I see it in my own heart, would dishonor, would look down on, would feel uncomfortable around. And he's calling me to not have these eyes like darkened by my arrogance or my fear, but to see the people we're serving how he sees them. Like, I made these people. They're just as valuable as you. Like, they're made in my image just like you. And really see with his eyes, so that what is inside me will be clean as I learn to serve with actual love.
Thank you.
How I think it's affected our microchurch. First, it's opened our eyes to the need that's around, and what it's doing for us is giving us opportunity to really exercise what Jesus calls us to, and denying ourselves in serving the kind of lost sheep of the world. What maybe our tendency could be is that, okay, like we want people to come into this building here, and like it's like, okay, we want to tell you about Jesus in here, and we want to bring you in maybe into our house. Okay, we want to tell you about Jesus here. But it's become our conviction. We want to go and bring Jesus to the community around us. We want to go and show that kind of love. And so we're getting that opportunity with our group where we can figure out how to move beyond the concept of what we're doing as just activity as well. Like, we really want this to be our life. The serving at Elida Home, serving in our community, next week we're doing a different spot. But serving is microchurch. It's not like an activity of microchurch. So that's the effect that I hope it's having on our group. With my family, I'm hoping I'm trying to set the right example for my son, and to help him to not be self-centered. Like, we want to look out for the children around us. We want to live out. In James, he says, religion that is pure and faultless is looking out for the orphans and widows. And so this is the opportunity that we have for it. Sometimes that concept is, you read that scripture and you're like, I don't know where I can do that, but we found an avenue for it. And so I'm trying to show that to my family and try to show that to my brothers and sisters. And you asked about like the effect for our neighbors. Like, we want to bring our neighbors and people around us on this kind of mission together. I think there's many people. Our church isn't the only people serving needs in the community. There's so many needs that are being met by people in the community. Like I know it's the heart of many members of like Asheville in general. When I've done something like go to Manna Food Bank and I served once or twice, but I've run into people. This is their weekly routine. Maybe they're here twice a week. This is what people have made it their lifestyle to do it, and we can. So when I know that that's the heart of people around us, our neighbors feel that too, and we want to bring them with it, and we want to set the example for Jesus and what we're doing, because we don't want to do it just to try to be nice to people. We want to do it because we're trying to show God and show Jesus.
That's great. I'm going to ask, now Sam, I have a substitute for you. Don't be discouraged, but I'm asking the panel to stay up with me, and I'm going to ask Michael and Emily to come up. We're going to close the sermon out here with a song of praise rather than a prayer for what God is doing, a praise to God, a song to God, because God is making all of this happen. I have a few other quick things I want to share. If you, Emily and Michael, you want to go. Sam, thank you so much. But going forward, from now, going forward, we are going to, as a church, quietly be generous to the poor. We don't need thank yous, attaboy, attagirls. We don't need attention. We just want to give our time, we want to give our money, and we want to pull in our community and our family to serve and give. Well, you ask yourself, have you been generous to the poor in the past year in your own way? What's your honest response? And does it alarm you at all? You can give your time to the poor in some way that makes sense for you. You can be generous. You can give your money even if you don't have much. You can ask your neighbors, your family, your friends, your coworkers to join you, even if you can't even be there. Just, hey, I know some people and they're going to serve. Amen. And you can ask them for their time and their money to help. Right now, our service events from our microchurch are not being attended well. And it's not right. It's not right. And I think it has something to reflect about what's going on inside. Like what Jesus is saying here. And it can mean something different for everybody in the room. So from now going forward, let's decide that we want to be clean by being generous to the poor. What a teaching. Now then, you Pharisees clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside you are full of greed and wickedness, you foolish people. Did not the one who made the outside make the inside also? But now, as for you and what's inside you, be generous to the poor, and everything will be clean for you. So the next time you're confessing or hearing confession, maybe a response will be, go be generous to the poor and everything will be clean.